Next step is going to be well, but also I'm going to check the mic.
Yep.
Just be so. Do you have like headphones? You're going to hear me. I'm just talking to you here, but make sure it's coming.
Okay, you have cake?
Yeah, I'm about to do this right now. Check, check, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. I am currently wearing all 4 lavaliers. Test, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, 1, 2. You want to check the stream?
Yeah.
Check, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, 1, 2. 3, 4. Test, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Matthew, let me see if you have all the panelists there. You can mic them.
All right. Check, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Washington Hilton. Check, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Testing, 1, 2. Good.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
It's faint.
If you don't mind, I mean, now we're friends.
And if you don't mind.
I don't care. I don't care.
Oh, we sound up.
Yeah. You want me to give him a price?
If you could just ask me to say a couple more words, I just want to see what it sounds like. Oh, he disappeared?
Yep.
Okay. I mean, you can hear it, it was just faint.
I can hear it. It was just saying.
Yeah, it's gonna be fine. I think it's fine. When he comes back, I'll ask him to do it one more time.
See, it bothers me a lot.
That's true. I know, I saw that. Hi. Andrew? Do you know Andrew? Andrew Dunkelman?
I'm not sure his last name, but he's with NAWB. He's a board member, I think.
Oh, Andrew Bursich. Yeah. I just saw him.
Thank you everyone that's joining. We will be getting started very shortly. Stay tuned.
It never does.
What's that?
It never does. It's here. It's okay. Andrew, we're the red shirts.
So
Somebody just told him, go in the ballroom and get Andrew. He's like,
I would have the same thing. Look at this sharp dress. Wow.
seriously, look at DC Red.
Did you change? Change since last time I saw you.
Sorry, I was ignoring you
No,
earlier.
you were
I
doing
had to,
important things.
I had to crank it out, so we have some.
We have 12
watching.
subscribers so far, or 12.
We got 12 people watching.
Oh, I went home, turned on 12 phones, and logged them all in.
Right, and then I called some FCM people. and told them to get on
There you go.
And told them to subscribe. No,
I had just
we had our constant content.
Do you think we're gonna be starting at 4?
well, I don't know. My watch says it's 9:25, so
Oh
My
wow.
watch says 3:59 and a half, so I'm just ignoring it.
Yeah, I don't think so. We're not even halfway full yet.
I think there are 4 of them.
I didn't know that we would get to halfway full.
Really?
Yeah, because people have been
It's a
all
long day. Yeah.
in session since 8 a.m. They're just getting out. Right now. That's what we said, and we asked, and they said we don't want to block the board. We're going to move
They're gonna-
the
yeah.
on there after Nicholas Gill's piece.
I think who speaks out.
Does he speak after?
I think so.
See, nobody told me that.
Let me see if I can go solve this mystery.
They are going to put it on there. They were just doing some photos or something. I'm not really sure.
Mystery solved.
Not my problem.
Sometimes
Only
you
so
just
much.
gotta have to say
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Somebody knows.
Ooh, I can zoom.
I can zoom in.
Oh yeah.
That's good. It's good to know. I already missed my phone.
They can hear us talking, so they can't hear you.
Good to see you. Glad you came.
See you right now.
When they're ready.
We're okay? Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your final call for seating. Our program is about to begin. This is your final call for seating. Please take your seats at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for our program to begin. Welcome to the Forum's Monday Policy Assembly and Awards session. At this time, please welcome to the stage, from McKinsey Global Institute, McKinsey's Business and Economics Research arm, the partner that leads research on the economics of digitization and the economics of multinational corporations, Sri Ramaswamy.
Here and a mic here, which is a recipe for trouble. My name is Sri. We are about to kick off a panel that's going to talk broadly about some of the major structural changes that we see going on in the labor market, how the preferences of workers are changing, how the preferences of employers may be changing, what role technology is playing in all of this, and what it means for all of us kind of at the local ecosystem level. How do we respond to these sorts of changes? We're going to have a pretty diverse group of speakers, so lucky for you, it's not going to be just me. They come from different angles, so I'm really kind of excited about this panel. So I'm glad I got to host this. Thank you to Ron and to everybody else at NOB for hosting us here. Let me just bring them out one by one, and I want to say a little bit about their background as I do that. So let me first start with Andrew Dunkelman. Welcome, Andrew. Andrew is a principal at Google.org. For those of you who don't know, Google.org is basically Google's foundation. It focuses on education, on inclusion, economic opportunity, justice, and Andrew's specific remit, correct me if I get this wrong, is focusing on technology and digital skills for underserved populations. And kind of a broader mandate to think about technology for the social good. Is that fair? All right. Thomas Lichtenberger is president and CEO of Festo Didactic, which has been around for 75 years, which is something I just learned. So Festo is a global manufacturer of automation and process control equipment. And Festo Didactic is their education technology arm. So they focus on technologies and solutions to help with educating the workforce. So think, learning labs, test beds, training programs, those sorts of things. Thomas has also written recently about the impact of new technologies, Industry 4.0, and we'll get into some of those discussions. And finally, Matt Singelman, who is the CEO of Burning Glass Technologies, which is a familiar name. Burning Glass runs one of the largest, if not the largest, repository of labor market data, the largest. We think so. And so Burning Glass runs data and analytics on that in a real-time basis to try to understand labor market trends, and their customer base is pretty varied. So it includes workers who are trying to find career opportunities, employers who are trying to find job matches, and even educational institutions that are trying to figure out what sort of curricula to create. So that's our panel. We'll go for an hour or so. Let me kick it off. Right. You guys welcome our panel, please. Okay, so we're going to make this more of a conversation than a panel discussion. So I think what we'll do is spend maybe a little bit of time talking about what we think are some of the challenges in the labor market. We could go on all day just talking about challenges, so I'm going to try to force us to spend maybe half, maybe even 2/3 of the time focusing on the solution space. To try to understand what is out there that's working, how do we scale some of these things up, how do we coordinate actions, because it'd be good to get into some of those sorts of discussions, which hopefully will be useful for you guys as well. Let me first start by asking each of you folks to offer some reaction to kind of this overall theme of the panel discussion. Major structural changes in the labor market and how we should be thinking about them. And the one caveat I will give, and we'll start with you and then we can go down, is to focus a little bit also on the positives. What actually is working in the US labor market as we think about these structural changes? What are some of the strengths of the labor market as we think about these changes?
Well, thank you. I'll offer two. One that has both, I think, a positive and a negative, and then the other that I think actually both have flip sides. The first trend, I think, is around demographic changes. And here in the United States, we're about to see the share of the working age population decline relative to its historicals. And I think that presents some challenges, certainly, with regard to how do we maintain growth in this country. And that's one of the things that we get excited about as we see new technologies, especially artificial intelligence and machine learning, that it does present an opportunity to sustain growth. There's some new research out from Drona Acemoglu that shows that developed economies with an even more aging workforce relative to ours, like Japan, have been able to sustain growth through the introduction of new technologies. So I think that certainly, it's hard to have this conversation without acknowledging the demographic shifts in this country. The second one, which I think is largely a positive, but will probably amuse some of you, is the decentralization of our entire workforce system. As we did an RFP for new solutions last year, and we got about 350 nonprofits using technology to address some of the challenges with skilling, with job quality, with the social safety nets. It's really remarkable to see the diversity of homegrown solutions to all of these challenges. I would say about 150 were really city-based, county-based solutions, and everyone was a little bit different and tailored to local market needs. If you think back to how the US has gone through big shifts in the labor market before, like the high school movement, that was a movement that was born out of states. I believe it was Iowa and Nebraska who engendered the first high schools in this country, or really pushed that ahead. And so I think it gives me some optimism that we will find solutions from the ground up, and we're already seeing that through the work we're doing at Google. And I'm sure that in venues like this, you come together and share what's working in certain communities, what can be replicated and what can't, for good and for bad. So those are two that I think are worth putting on the table.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I think we will come back to this point about this, this notion of the homegrown systems, the thousand flowers blooming sort of approach. That is something I would like to get into as part of the panel discussion to figure out, how far we go down that road versus, is there a role for some a more top-down or larger coordinated approach as well? Thomas, your thoughts, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it all starts with jobs. we have to be really clear what the jobs of the future are and in what direction they are going. From a global automation perspective, I'm totally convinced that all the jobs will be related to Industry 4.0. Some more, some less, but all will be somehow related to it. Industry 4.0, or Industrial Internet of Things, which is basically the same, they are changing how people, machines, data, processes are interacting based on modern technology. I was thinking about manufacturing. And when you think about the United States and we look backwards, this was something America really was good at. We were good at manufacturing. When we look into the future, what the US need to be good at, it's manufacturing. It will be just different compared to what it was 10, 20, or 50 years ago. And we have to adjust to it. And when you look into the United States, into the different pockets we have, you actually see some quite nice hotspots, some workforce innovation which is going on. And from this we have to learn, we can multiply it, and we can scale it up. Industry 4.0 will change the game. I'm totally convinced about this. And when it comes to global competitiveness, the United States has, from my perspective, the potential to be at the forefront of industrial automation. But we are not there yet. At the moment, other countries in Europe or in Asia are leading the game. They are leading the charge. So, and what we have to do is to do actually what we are doing today, to talk about it, how we can elevate workforce training to the next level to close the skills gap we are having and be prepared for the future.
Thanks. It's interesting you bring up manufacturing, because I think one of the things that we've seen in this country is the nation sort of speaks in two voices when it comes to manufacturing. There are some people who believe the decline is inevitable and we should be looking at other opportunities. There's others who believe the decline is not inevitable and something actually needs to be done to fix this. One of the things that we did at McKinsey is to look at the role that manufacturing plays in the economy. And to your point, there's no other sector that has the kind of wide geographic footprint that this sector has. And through its capital investment and productivity, the spillover benefits that it has, even if it doesn't employ the kinds of millions of workers that it used to in the past, the tens of millions of workers, it still has this outsized impact on the local ecosystems. And honestly, we haven't found a replacement for that. And so we might come back to that point as well. Matt, how about your thoughts?
So we all live in the shadow of the tremendous promise of transformation in the workforce system. I don't know whether it's promise or threat. We all hear about jobs that are going to go away. I think much more than that, what we're seeing is jobs changing in terms of how they're defined, in terms of the types of skills that are required to do those jobs. Thankfully, I think we've got, as we anticipate those changes, I think there are indeed a number of strengths that we have to build upon, and some opportunities that we have to leverage those strengths to do yet better. So first of all, I would point to the fact that I think as I look at this room and people who are serving both employers and job seekers every day, one of the things that's most striking is the extent to which over the course of the last generation, we have transformed our work toward a broad acceptance and recognition of the fact that true solutions need to be demand-driven. They need to start with the fact that employers are customers at least as much as job seekers are, because ultimately, if we aren't aligning toward where the jobs are, then programs are not going to be successful. Ultimately, there has become a broad acceptance of the fact that solutions need to be market-driven and thought of as a market problem as opposed to a social problem. So I think that's a very important conceptual framework. Again, if you went back a generation, as well, think about where the world of workforce development was maybe a generation ago, as it still is in many other countries. it is often thought of as a social problem and a social problem that you're trying to deal with, as opposed to how do we make sure that we can better match supply and demand. Part and parcel of that is the development that we have had in this country of a very strong culture of an infrastructure for ongoing training. Where, you know, we are not a country that expects that people will be the same thing over the course of their careers. There are a number of other countries that have much more verticalized career development, and there are some advantages to that. But we have a tremendous resource in America's community college system and workforce development system. Our workforce boards here today are doing heroic work in ensuring that people have a way of accruing new skills over time. So we think about a job market that is increasingly hybridizing, where new skills are blending into work. There's going to be an increasing demand on that infrastructure. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that over the course of this discussion. The last piece, which I think is a great strength that we have that we can build on today, is the orientation of America's education system and, frankly, of our workforce toward what I'll call human skills. Skills like empathy and creativity and the like. Those are not necessarily strengths in other countries. We think about things like America's liberal arts heritage for our college grads, whether it be even the kind of human skills that somebody in a retail career has the opportunity to develop. Those are tremendous strengths. They may not be adequate on their own, and I think increasingly they can only be a base. But they are incredibly important because in an automation-driven future, the things that are hardest to automate are those human skills. So the fact that we have an education system that emphasizes those human skills, creativity and creative thinking and critical thinking, that we have workforce experiences and a workforce orientation that emphasizes human interaction, I think are going to be great strengths. Things that I think continue to be missing, that are going to be challenges for us, notwithstanding those strengths we need to address, is going to be the need for better information. We've talked already about some of the mismatches in the job market and the critical need to be able to have a more responsive job market, a more responsive workforce system. We need better information in order to do that.
Great. So this is a good launchpad. So let me pick up on something that Matt, you just mentioned, and then Thomas, you as well. This idea of using the employer almost as a customer, right? And so when we think about skill demand, how are those skill demands changing? We talked about this notion of creativity or empathy or problem solving. In your experience, and Matt or Thomas, either one of you can start, and then we'll all jump in. How are employers communicating those needs to training institutions or to local governments or to anybody else? What does it mean to say, I want somebody who is creative or a problem solver? Is there a vocabulary that's emerging around this new skill demand?
When you look at today's production, it's so different to what most of us have in their mind, to what they know. It's not dirty, it's not oily, it's not greasy, it's clean. You can eat from the floor, it's highly automated, it's exciting. You just have to imagine what this mobile phone, the smartphone all did to our world and our personal behavior, how it changed our life and how it automated everything in our private life. And now imagine a similar degree of automation on the factory floor, where all the devices, the machines interact with each other without any additional involvement, where how they predict themselves what will happen in the future. And this will become even more accelerated when we start talking about artificial intelligence, and I'm pretty sure you can talk to her about this later on. So all this creates a huge demand for different skills, for different careers which do not exist today. So, and therefore, it's incredibly important that employers start talking to the school system. Because it's not only the responsibility of the educational system to educate students, to create the workforce of the future. It's also the responsibility of the industrial companies. And how can they do that? They can get involved. They have to get involved with the schools, the colleges, universities, or high schools to help them adjust to this new technology, to help educate the instructors to be able to teach this new technology. So in a nutshell, the involvement of industry, active involvement of industry into or with the education system is the key from my perspective.
I would certainly agree that there's a tremendous need for employers to engage more directly than they are today, and to send clearer signals about what's needed. And I think there's plenty of examples that we're all familiar with of employers who are indeed stepping up and looking to education and training partners as suppliers in the same way that they interact with and develop strong partnerships with any parts of their supply chain. So all of that is absolutely correct. The good news is that even before employers, even as employers are only just starting to systematize that communication, the signals are already there. Employers in their job postings actually turn out to be more efficient than we might think. And that is that efficiency about what they express of what they need, notwithstanding that any given posting is, might be fraught with some issues. That efficiency actually manifests as much with soft skills as it does with hard skills. Here's how I can tell you why. For one thing, if employers, all that stuff at the bottom, hey, we want people who are creative, who are good communicators, we're all just a bunch of stuff that they mush that they put on at the bottom of the job description, they don't really mean it. Or if it's just a bunch of common employability skills, as often people refer to it. You would expect those skills to be the same on every job posting. What we find instead is that employers are actually surprisingly consistent about what they need within any given kind of jobs, but there are actually very significant differences in the soft skills employers signal from job to job to job. And in fact, employers not only signal different soft skills for different kinds of jobs, but they express skill gaps around different soft skills for different kinds of jobs. So all of that says that what employers say matters. We can already listen to what they say. But I think one of the problems here, notwithstanding that we have an educational system that does emphasize those things more than perhaps in other places, one of the problems that await employers is that it is very hard to separate the training of soft skills from the training of hard skills. And as a result, we wind up with employers pointing at people and saying, hey, but they don't have the ability to think or write or whatever it is. And so it's sort of the paradox of the American education system. On the one hand, we emphasize those things. On the other hand, employers perceive those gaps. And I think it's because they're separated from one another. If we look at a lot of technical training programs, those technical training programs are developed around technical skills distinct from the soft skills that are necessary to actuate those technical skills.
Maybe just add one point on that. I think I'm newer to this space than I think a lot of folks in the room. And when I started to try to get smart on these issues, so many people told me, well, one of the core problems is employers aren't at the table. I heard that again and again and again. And then when I started to look at solutions, I found that to be manifestly untrue. I actually thought that across the education system, across workforce development, employers were at the table. That's not to let them off the hook, but I do think it indicates that perhaps the challenge is not about being at the table, but rather in a sort of effective translation of what needs are. And to Matt's point, I think machine learning and artificial intelligence, we need to consider how these new technologies will enable us to create many of the clearer signals. What machine learning does best, more than anything else, is find patterns and causations within data that the human eye can't see. And I'm really optimistic that as we layer on new types of data analytics through machine learning, through artificial intelligence, including, for example, the Google Cloud Jobs API, which looks at massive amounts of job descriptions and then folks in jobs and is able to see linkages that we might not be able to see with the naked eye, I think that enables you to pick up on some of these distinctions within soft skills that might have escaped us for a long time.
Are there any examples from other countries or other regions that have been trying experiments with this kind of this new vocabulary, this combination of soft and hard skills? Anything we can learn from what's been going on overseas?
I would add to this. First of all, I have to say what Matt said about soft skills is extremely important. And you have to combine this with the learning process itself. We are talking about new technology, new processes. That's a lot of stuff, And on top of that, it's changing all the time. When you hear me talking about Industry 4.0, this is not a technology. This is more a philosophy. So what Industry 4.0 is today is different next year. So it's more the skill set, how to deal with that. And then you are immediately on the soft skills side. How to deal with problems, how to address them, how to work in a team, how to manage your workload. All those kind of things, they're incredibly important. And this is what we have to teach in combination with actually hands-on learning. It's, the times of typical traditional classroom learning, they are over, in my opinion. The students, when they have to be prepared for what's happening out there in the real world, they have to be trained on real-world equipment, on products and processes which are used in the factory, really. So moving the factory of the future into the classroom, having hands-on learning, combining this with the soft skill approach, with teamwork, with how to approach topics. This is, from my perspective, a way how to address this topic.
I think this is a question of scale. There are a lot of good experiments out there, basically, which are bringing together supply and demand more efficiently, that are fostering that communication between employers and job seekers, or between demand, supply, and the organs of supply. If we think about ourselves in this room as being the organs of supply to the market, as educators as being the organs of supply to the market. And so there's plenty of good experiments and endeavors that are happening both here in the US and certainly abroad as well. Most of them depend upon brokering very close relationships between sets of specific employers and specific training programs or specific educational institutions. In Germany, for example, there's a centuries-old tradition of a Bund infrastructure of employers being able to get together and articulate what they need and the like. The real question is, how do you do that at scale? We don't have a Bund infrastructure. We have a very disaggregated and diffuse industry here. Getting everyone down to the table to set standards is a great dream, but not going to happen anytime soon. We aren't a small market like a Singapore, where you can kind of get much of the employer community around a specific industry together around a donut breakfast and get concurrence.
Even if you did, nobody would listen to you here.
I'm sorry?
Even if you did, nobody would listen to you here.
Well, yes. So we like to think about, as we think about scaling this up, and how does this happen more broadly, we think about how you can create a better infrastructure for both aggregating the signals in the market and then for broadcasting them. So engineers like to talk about what they call signal processing problems. Signals are getting sent, but they aren't necessarily getting received. The job market is, as we all know, we're out there serving thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of job seekers, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of employers in trying to broker individual transactions. That's a hard slog, and it's critical work, and makes a huge difference in people's lives. At the same time, as a signaling mechanism, that depends right now on individuals in this room being able to hear a specific, you know, I know this employer, they're looking for this, here's a set of people who just lost their jobs at this plant, and again, it's heroic, and I hear those stories like, wow, how did they know, right? If you start to think instead of how do we create better antennae, how do you create a listening device, like, you know, those kind of hearing horns, those listening horns that used to characterize how you know, what we give to older people. Hey, how do we make sure that we can aggregate up all the different language that that different people are using? And I think a point was made just a minute ago. Andrew said that we have this great opportunity to use AI to listen more closely. But we're not going to get everyone to speak the same language. It was a great idea to have everybody start speaking in Esperanto. The world of work will not speak Esperanto. What we need to do is figure out how do we translate all the different signals, all the different ways that somebody is talking about the same job, all the different words that mean the same thing and all the same words that mean different things. How do we do a better job of understanding that, and then in turn making sure that individual job seekers, employers, and educators have the critical information they need to do better?
Yeah, and I think certainly, you know, from our perspective, from the work that we've done with state and local economic development, there's always these two tensions that you're trying to resolve at the local level. One is this notion of what has to be done at the local level versus what needs some kind of regional or national strategy, if not an outright policy, right? At least some kind of a coordination of, okay, are we all pointing in the same direction or not? That's one tension that always seems to exist. And then the other tension that exists is sort of the time dimension. And I need to solve this problem right now for this employer or that group of unemployed people. How do I balance that with, oh my God, like 10 years from now, this is where we're going to be, and what investments do I need to make? Any thoughts on that? How do you balance that? Anything coming out from the innovation space, Andrew, that helps people kind of think through that? Either of those two balancing equations.
It's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, I think like with so many things, the answer is you have to do both and do it well, and that's tricky. I'm interested in how you create systems that are resilient both to sort of dynamic needs as well as can persist along long time scales. So for instance, one of the key challenges is how do you improve signaling about alternative credentials? Because alternative credentials can come and go, and they're actually relatively dynamic compared to, say, the formal credentialing process, accreditation process rather, of like a 4-year degree. And so is there a platform that you can build to enable better discovery of alternative credentialing? I think that's an age-old problem and nobody's really cracked it really well. But that's the sort of questions that we're answering, and we're on the market for solutions there. So if folks have answers, I think it'd be a conversation I'd love to pick up on.
I think one thing which is important to bear in mind is that the job market is actually micro. We're used to thinking about, and you asked the question of both, you know, where is the role for national strategy, where's the role for local action, and then how do we affect that action? I think one thing to bear in mind is that we're used to thinking about the job market as a job market. There is no single job market. There is, in fact, even the notion of a job market itself is a little bit of a misnomer. We know that the market is really much more driven by skills than it is by jobs. Individual skills in individual locations have very different supply-demand dynamics. There's no one skill gap. There are skill gaps for specific kinds of jobs and specific kinds of locations. So overall, I think the level of local action in states and local communities is a place where there's a much greater opportunity for action. I think as we think about how to address then and how to take action within that framework, I often think about the old Willie Sutton rule, right? Willie Sutton was a bank robber. We've all heard the story. He was being hauled off to prison after a long streak of bank robberies, and some reporter asked him, "Why did you rob those banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." So when I think about where I would focus that action, I would focus on where the pain points are. Again, this is not we don't want to think about this as a social problem, we want to think of it as a market problem. If we can crack the demand side of this, we have an opportunity to really prove out and to really prove out how change can happen. If we say, where are the places that employers are failing to get what they need, where those where those signaling problems are most severe, and we address those pain points, we create alternative credentials that are aimed at those pain points. That's where we can have the greatest leverage.
Thomas, let me ask you something from the multinational perspective. And the reason I ask this is because in the research that we've done, we've sort of seen a different response from smaller and mid-sized, locally oriented companies versus some of the larger firms. And one of the ways that the difference manifests itself is in the interaction with local economic development or local workforce board agencies, where sometimes the multinational firms will come to us and say, you know what, we've got operations in 8 different states, 20 different counties, I have supply chains straddling boundaries, right? I don't want to be the person dealing with 10 different workforce initiatives. I want somebody to do this for me. Does that resonate with you or with some of the folks that you've worked with? Is there a solution to that when we also have this local kind of activism going on?
It's a difficult situation, and it's certainly difficult or different between a small corporation and a large corporation. And with many problems, it's about the balance. And it's about the short-term needs and the long-term needs. How do we address this? At the moment, we have short-term needs to solve problems which we are all aware of, especially the smaller companies. But we also know exactly in which direction it will go in the future. What technology will do, how the jobs will look like in the future, and we have to prepare for this right now. And we have to also help the companies from the educational side to be prepared for this. When it comes for this technology, and there's no doubt when you go out at the moment, they are not all there yet. They have to fight with their daily sales. They have not implemented all this technology. But if you ask them, they all agree, yes, this will come. This will be the future, how it will look like. And they are basically asking for help on their journey to this in this direction. And this is also a new role which the education sector has to provide, to help and educate and support especially these smaller companies on their way into the future.
Let me ask a little bit about this notion of mobility. Right? So this is a country that used to pride itself on labor mobility. Mobility broadly defined, so not just the geographic mobility, but certainly part of it, but also mobility across industry boundaries, mobility across firm boundaries. There's a lot of economic literature that talks about the fact that mobility is what ultimately drives wage growth, because workers move from one firm to another, they get a bump up in incomes, and that's what drives mobility. That's what drives income growth for households. And our rate of mobility, at least the geographic mobility, has dropped in half in the last 20 years or so. There's some evidence that the mobility between firms and between industries has also dropped. And there's a bunch of kind of arguments about why that's happening. Is it because the workers are aging? Is it because there's something else going on? Is it dual income families? Is it a demand problem, not enough firms starting up? Any kind of thoughts on that as you think about from a workforce development standpoint? How do you solve the problem of mobility while you're solving for these near-term skill gaps and skill demand issues?
I can maybe kick it off and say, just speaking personally, I grew up in Houma, Louisiana, which is a town of about 35,000, and since the oil price crash in 2014 has lost 17,000 jobs in the county. It's a massive labor shock. And when I go there, I recently saw the census estimates that about 1,000 people have moved. So you see that there is less response to the labor shock than you might anticipate in terms of out-migration. And there are lots of demographic and economic reasons we can talk about why people aren't moving. The cost of housing in economically productive cities like San Francisco, I know it firsthand, is outrageous. Demographics mean that people aren't able to pick up and move in the same way that they used to. Financial security is down, and so people don't have the social safety net that they used to pick up and go to a new city. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to recognize and validate people's needs to be in the community where they are, around people they love, and sometimes economists, in my opinion, get this wrong by validating mobility and getting the heck out of Dodge over restoration and building up local communities and workforce systems. So, you know, as I think about that challenge, there are a few things that you need to do. One is we need broadband access. Obviously, this is sort of a Google perspective, but certainly to increase economic development in communities that may be so-called left behind, I think you have to consider the role that broadband plays. Secondly, how do you increase the role of remote work, remote outsourcing to communities? There's a lot of work at Google that probably could be done in communities outside of San Francisco that are lower labor costs. So I think a lot about that. And thirdly, how do you increase the growth of sort of homegrown solutions in education and healthcare, which is going to be where growth in these communities come from, to really drive the labor market forward. So I often get on my soapbox about this issue when I hear folks like our chief economist Hal Varian talk about mobility, and I think there's an important counterpoint to be made about it's not all about mobility.
I totally agree. I think we tend to, we tend to treat people as a commodity that can just sort of be shuffled across a playing board. And communities represent people's homes and their rootedness, and I'm not ready to look at a future for America that writes off our rural communities, which have been too often on the short end of opportunity. So here's sort of a way I think about this. We are living increasingly in a talent-scarce world. Now, yes, part of that's being driven by the fact that we're in a white-hot economy and all that kind of stuff. But even beyond that, when you look at the future of work, where new sets of skills are infusing one another and creating these kind of tinctures that are hard to find, we're finding sets of skills that don't tend to go together. In a talent-scarce world, demand follows supply. So the key to being able to ensure the viability of America's communities depends in no small part on our ability to increase the skill level of those communities, to ensure that people have a mechanism for identifying the skills that will make them more valuable, that people have a mechanism for not only identifying what those skills are, but for acquiring them. I mentioned a few minutes ago that the job market is driven by skills rather than jobs. Even within any given kind of job, there are certain sets of skills that will get you paid better, that will make you more competitive. That's true from the administrative assistant who can make about 25% more by acquiring Salesforce.com skills. It's true for the graphic designer who can make almost $20,000 more a year by acquiring HTML5 skills. It's true of the production plant manager who likewise makes about 20% more by acquiring the ability to build a SQL database and be able to look at various kinds of production trends within his plant, right? So skills and learning are the unique opportunity that people have to arbitrage in themselves. What we need to do is to first of all make sure that we're giving people that map, that they can sort of see where those opportunities are to become more valuable and therefore more sought after where they are. And second, that we are restructuring our education and training infrastructure to enable people to acquire the skills within their field that will allow them to move up, or the specific sets of skills that will allow them to move between jobs without saying, hey, you need to go back to school and get a whole new degree.
So I think the thing that I struggle with is who pays for this, right? Particularly in the context of these sort of declining communities, the communities that have seen a massive economic hit, right? Because the reality is also that we have massive tuition debt in this country. It hasn't been talked about as much as it was even a couple of years ago, but it's still there. And there's a lot of evidence, both anecdotally and through some of the statistics, that if you look at associate degree holders, somewhere between 20 to 30% of them earn less than the median high school graduate, right? 20 to 30% of four-year degree holders earn less than the median of the associate degree. Adjusting for the field of study, and of course, if you're going to learn basket weaving, then that's your choice. Adjusting for the field of study and the cost of living in the location. How do we? So who pays for these sorts of things for this kind of a skill intervention? Particularly if you want to do this at scale. What are some models that exist, particularly even from outside the US?
So I think there's certainly a lot of demand for employers to pay for more. I want to come back to that in a second, though. First, I think the biggest opportunity that we have from a financing perspective is to get a lot of the waste out of the system. When we say we're going to send somebody back to school to get a whole new degree in order to move from job to job, that's a very expensive endeavor. It's expensive both in terms of cost and in terms of opportunity cost. When we say that somebody needs to not just buy a single skill, but they need to buy a whole bundle of skills, whether that bundle is represented by a degree or not, that is a very inefficient form. When we see programs of study, whether they're degreed or non-degreed, that are not aligned to job market success, that is a significant inefficiency not only to the economy, but to individual workers and individual learners. So to the extent that we can create, I like to think about the analogy of Spotify and the kind of disruptive model that it introduced in the world of entertainment and music, right? You don't need to buy an album, you buy an individual track. And
so the unbundling notion of...
That's right. I think that can make this whole process a lot more efficient and allow people to achieve ROI much faster. Now, there will still be a question of how does it get paid, even at a lower price point, but that certainly takes some of the challenge away.
I'm in the opinion that when everybody who want to go into the direction of manufacturing or something similar needs to be able to deal with the fundamentals. Everybody needs to know how to use a screwdriver, or to do the basic things. And this is just important. Doesn't matter in what direction you go, and we need to give our young students the possibility to get this kind of knowledge in a very affordable way. And I see that some states are going in this direction. However, when you move forward, I think we see a different way to get educated in the future, which is a little bit further than what we're used to on the traditional way. The students will have the opportunity and need to have the opportunity to get exactly the skills they want, they need at the time they need it. So the time where you start at high school, you go to college, and you go to work, I think this will change in the future. There are different ways to acquire the skills through online offerings, through manufacturers. There will be different sources to gain this knowledge. A situation which we have to solve then is the quality insurance. How do the employers then actually know that this specific person has all the knowledge? This is something where we actually have to solve. But this is what we are faced with, and where we have to find a solution for. And coming back to the topic of paying for education, it's also a differentiation. Is it before you work or while you are working? Because we have to be clear, education never ends. It has to be a lifelong learning. Even if you have a job, you have to continue to work. This will never end. Everything is evolving so fast. So, and therefore, in this situation, employers have to invest in their people as well. Because if they don't, it will be even more expensive. If they are not investing in their people, it will be more expensive because they lose people and they have to hire new people, they have to educate new people. So in the long run, investment in your own people as an employer is actually the cheapest way to go.
If I can offer one example, which will also allow me to make a shameless plug, Google in January, launched in partnership with Coursera our new IT support certificate, which is designed to get folks from novice to career ready in IT support in 8 to 10 months. And I think it illustrates sort of this three-part solution. The first is, as Matt said, using technology to drive down the cost of delivery. Obviously, online learning is nothing new, but we're experimenting with new things around success coaching and the way that content is delivered to be able to deliver IT support training in a much lower cost fashion than maybe more traditional models. The second is employers putting their money where their mouth is, and so we've put more than $10 million into content creation and scholarship so that people can get access to this content. And then the third is about tapping into existing sources of funds. So once you bring the cost of training down, then you can use formula funding, you can use student aid in order to deliver that training at a much lower price point and without having to create sort of new entitlements. So I think those are three pathways forward. Lots more where that came from, and I'd be happy to discuss offline.
Well, so let me ask, so I know we have less than a minute, and apparently these are ejector seats, so we'll make sure we wrap up. Last question to you folks, particularly this notion of, you know, the different ways to be educated, sort of this kind of a lifelong learning thing, getting costs out of the system. Who else needs to be at the table? So from a local workforce board perspective, we've talked about employers needing to be there. Who else do we need? I mean, obviously we need, you know, the community colleges. Do we need investors? Do we need the tech firms? Who else should folks be thinking about bringing to the table?
One thing what we really have to be clear of, it's not the task of one individual segment of the educational ecosystem we're having, the colleges. We have to look at high school, college, university. They have to work together as well. Since years, we have declining student enrollment on the college side. We have to work on the high school side to allow the young students to be exposed to how the real world really looks like. So we have to work high school on the college side together with the university and the employers. We have to bring all of them together at the table.
I think it's going to be critical as well to make sure that workers and learners are well represented in a workforce system of the future. I said earlier that one of our great strengths is that we are demand driven, that we recognize that ultimately we need to start with jobs and be able to help guide people toward those jobs. But I think it is important for us to bear in mind, and as everyone here does every day, that we need to make sure that we are doing, from the earliest ages, we're doing a better job of giving people themselves, of giving learners themselves, workers themselves, a GPS, if you will, that's giving them, well, keep it in the Google family, ways for their careers, right? How do you make sure that you not only can set that direction of where you're going, but we have one of the things that's one of the great innovations that Waze introduced was to develop a navigation that is adaptive, right? This is how the market is changing. This is how you need to be rerouted. It's great to have a conversation between educators on the one side, employers on the other side, but we're not a centrally planned economy. One of the most important things we can do is empower workers and learners to make better informed decisions so that they can be smarter actors in their own careers.
I think our work's cut out for us. Right?
I think
Just
so.
leave it there.
I think so. All right, well, Andrew, Thomas, Matt, thank you very much for your comments. I hope you guys can stick around for a few minutes if there's any questions. But otherwise, thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our participants again for making this engaging panel session.